Picking up where we left off of chapter 9, I believe. Meeting with drug salespeople leads to formulary addition requests for the company's drugs, although most of the requested drugs present little or no therapeutic advantage over existing drugs. It leads to higher drug costs and decreased prescribing of generic drugs, and it leads to irrational prescribing in other ways. A study showed that physicians were more likely than other physicians to request these drugs to be added if they had met with salespeople from the companies, odds ratio 13, or had accepted money from them, odds ratio 19. Sponsored meals led to formulary addition requests. Even when the information spread at lunch rounds about the sponsor's and competitor's drug is inaccurate. In a study where salespeople knew their pitches were tape recorded, 11% of the statements about the sponsor's drugs were inaccurate and favored the drug, whereas none of the statements about competitors' drugs were favorable. There is a reason to suspect it's much worse when it's a one-to-one interaction without witnesses. Whenever research studies have examined dose-response relationships, they existed. Thus, the more exposure to industry people, the worse for the patients and our national economies. So-called educational events are not any better. The sponsor's drug is always prefrontally highlighted and prescribing practice changes in favor of the sponsor's drug. One of the best things a company can do is to invite doctors to a lavish resort. On an all-expense-paid trip to the Caribbean, the doctors learned about a new intravenous antibiotic and a new intravenous cardiovascular drug. Only one of 20 doctors admitted that such a trip could possibly influence prescribing decisions, and the other 19 denied it. However, usage at the hospitals more than trebled for the first drug and more than doubled for this. Okay, that has to be a typo. Tripled, not trebled. Whatever. Whereas little happened in national usage patterns for the two drugs. Interestingly, the new drugs did not replace the old ones. They simply increased overall drug usage, as we have seen for other areas. For example, NSAIDs and SSRIs. For some reason, the names of the drugs were not revealed, but hospital owners and taxpayers pay for trips like this many times over what they cost for the companies. It is not surprising that a major source of income for the drug industry is their Me Too drugs. They are rarely any better than old drugs. But we are usually left in the dark about this, as the industry generally avoids to perform head-to-head comparisons of similar drugs, and as those that are carried out are often rigged. Publicly funded trials that compare a new drug with an old one commonly reveal that we have wasted vast amounts of money on drugs that were not any better than cheaper alternatives. A study from British Columbia showed that even with a generous definition of what constitutes a therapeutic advance, 80% of the increase in drug expenditure between 1996 and 2003 was explained by new, patented drugs that didn't offer a substantial improvement. If only half of the Me Too drugs had been priced to compete with the older alternatives, the state could have saved a quarter of its total expenditure on prescription drugs. Doctors say they don't take drug ads in medical journals seriously, but they are influenced by them. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there. A 2003 paper reported on 287 advertisements for antihypertensive or lipid-lowering drugs and found 125 promotional claims with references. However, 23 references were unretrievable as they referred to data on file or inaccessible monographs, and 45 of 102 reference claims were not supported by the reference provided, which was therefore pure window dressing to make the ad look scientific. An analysis of 109 full-page advertisement in 10 leading medical journals showed that in half of cases, they would lead to improper prescribing if the physician had no other information about the drug. An industry insider who responded to a paper in the BMJ where we had compared Cochrane reviews with industry-supported meta-analyses of the same drugs in the same disease, gave an amusing account of the issue of the unretrievable references under the heading Pharmaceutical Lies. We have doctors from all over the world who drop into Australia on a first-class, all-expenses-paid junket trip telling us how great a particular medicine is. If you read the small print on a pharmaceutical company filer, you will find most references are on file or have been presented at a midnight session of the Darfur Cardiologists Conference. As a medical director of a pharmaceutical company, I learned how to get articles published in journals, with one journal promising publication if we purchased 2,000 reprints at $10 each. Summing all this up, a systematic review of 58 studies showed that information from the drug industry leads to higher prescribing frequency, higher costs, and lower prescribing quality. We should ask our politicians to forbid marketing of drugs, as it is harmful, just like marketing of tobacco is, which is why we have prohibited tobacco advertisements. Drug companies use the rhetoric of liberalism to defend their right to advertise, but liberalism is about the right of people to do what they like as long as it doesn't harm others, not about companies having a right to do immense harm to people and society with impunity. Mr. Fauci. Actually, most physicians agree that drug salespeople as speakers should be banned, but they are highly inconsistent, as most of them meet with salespeople every week, and it gets worse all the time. In 2004, there were 237,000 meetings and talks in the United States sponsored by drug companies featuring doctors, salespeople as speakers, and 134,000 led by company salespeople. Just 6 years earlier, doctors and industry salespeople delivered together only 60,000 talks. There are also planted messages. The industry has armies of paid bloggers that distribute pharma material disguised as opinion on the internet, and most major media outlets have pharma ties. For example, James Murdoch and most major media outlets have pharma ties. For example, James Murdoch, son of Rupert Murdoch, was on the board of GlaxoSmithKline, and Time Inc.'s CEO Laura Lang formerly worked for Pfizer and Bristol-Myers Squibb. This helps explain why we so often see completely uncritical articles in the media that are copy and paste versions of company press releases about their wonder drugs. Like the drug industry, the media are immensely powerful, and when the two join forces, falsehoods are at their worst. The industry also tries to get access to making changes in Wikipedia to ensure pharma-friendly messages appear there too. They do the same with comedians. Hard sell ad nauseum. Drugs against nausea and vomiting tell a story about how the voluntary efforts of 100,000 patients were wasted because of poor research conduct. Ondansetron is a showcase for this. When 108 trial reports were examined more closely, it turned out that 14 of them were not new trials, but reports that included some of the same patients reported on before. None of these additional reports had a clear cross-reference to the original reports. Although this is required, and some had a completely new set of authors, some had combined data from two trials, added a new treatment arm, added more data, used a different anesthetic, used other numbers of patients, or reported other patient characteristics than in the original report. One would have thought it impossible to have a new treatment arm and to use a different anesthetic in the same trial as reported elsewhere. The trials published more than once were the most positive ones. The NNT to prevent vomiting compared with placebo was 16 for the trials, that there were not duplicated and only 3 of the duplicated ones. The manipulations, which give the readers a false impression of the drug, were generally not detected, as papers and a textbook cited the same very favorable trial more than once, as if it were separate trials. Ondansetron was originally marketed by GlaxoSmithKline for nausea and vomiting after chemotherapy, but the company wanted to sell it also for but the company wanted to also sell it for post-operative problems. In 1993, an advertisement in the BMJ talked about making history of post-operative nausea and vomiting, but all 5 references were to studies in cancer. In 1994, 8 placebo-controlled trials of ondansetron for post-operative problems had been published, compared to only 4 trials with an active comparator. Considering that several effective medicines were already available, this wealth of placebo-controlled trials was neither ethical nor helpful for the patients and their doctors, but it was certainly helpful for Glaxo's marketing machine. Oh, so much talking. Okay. Although ondansetron was very expensive, it was highly used instead of the much cheaper alternatives. When ondansetron ran out of patent, its effectiveness evaporated overnight. It seemed as there were now other patented stetrons that were much more expensive. One was granisetron. Its effect on prevention of post-operative nausea was assessed in the largest Cochrane review ever performed. It runs over 785 pages and includes 737 trials, 103,237 patients comparing a drug with placebo or another drug, or doses or timing administration. This is a colossal waste of resources and abuse of commercial purpose of the patient's trust in medical research. Much few trials. Okay, I gotta be back. We'll pick up on this